Let's go!
What's worse, Tekken 8 Heat Mode or Soul Calibur 6 Reversal Edge? So I think that leads me into slap this desk, leads me into the next part of my conversation today. Good friggin' question. So somebody talked about Tekken 8 Heat Mode, and guess what I'm gonna talk about as a result? Virtua Fighter. We're gonna talk about VF, and you'll understand why in just a second. I'm baiting you right now. For anybody that's on YouTube, I appreciate a thumbs up. I appreciate you guys liking or commenting on the video, because we're talking about VF today. Quadrillion times I have talked about Virtua Fighter, been hopeful about the future, been visiting its past, all that kind of stuff, right? On video games and whatnot. VF isn't a game that particularly appeases to like everybody, but that first month of Ultimate Showdown was legit wonderful. Like everyone's really seemed to be in Virtua Fighter, and we learned later on that it did very well, shockingly well, from the lead producers that talked to Harada on Harada's bar. That was great. It was like, damn, 2021, almost 3 years ago now, Virtua Fighter was back, and it was sick, and it was a lot of fun, and more people were playing VF in one spot than almost like ever before, maybe outside of the 90s. With that being said, it seemed like a pretty clear and cut situation to me personally that the future of Virtua Fighter wasn't a situation of like a Marvel versus Capcom before the collection where it's like, no, you have like 1 in 14 million chance. But to me, Virtua Fighter wasn't even that. I don't think this is a question of possibility anymore. I think it's happening after the success of that re-release. It's just a matter of when is it going to happen. And we might be getting a little close to that moment because Sega is just straight talking about it right now, when for years they have been teetering and teasing. For anybody that's been like paying attention to this shit, and it's like, bro, just say the words Virtua Fighter. Come on. Can you just please stop edging the shit out of the entirety of people that are 40 years and older? Please. And they did. They did something. There was a unique thing that popped up. There's a full interview on VGC talking with the Sega Transmedia boss to hear their plans for entertainment outside of video games and the revival of a bunch of IPs. To get to it straight, let me just go Control F, Virtua. So we have a suite of titles in development right now that fall into that legacy bucket, which we announced last year at the Game Awards. Crazy Taxi, Jet Set, Streets of Rage, Shinobi, and we have another Virtua Fighter being developed. Hold on a second. You just don't drop that shit and then move on. Let's talk about Shadow the Hedgehog now. Wait, what? Hold on a second. So anyway, that's pretty big. Kind of like shocking to me the way they casually just drop that news when a very large subsect of the Japanese FGC, much less the fighting game community in general, has been frothing for a new Virtua Fighter or any announcement therein for so long. Cool. You know, like, I'm surprised it happened this way, but we got confirmation. We've been hearing the lead devs talk about this aspect for forever, like literally on the edge. They're not saying it, but they're just saying it. And Harada practically has been saying it for a multitude of years now. We know it's going to be there. It's just like, when is it going to happen? I very much hope that we're not that far from these things eventually getting some sort of an update. I would like to say that Game Awards is a month away, and there's a couple of like hopeful things in here that I do kind of want to discuss, and we have talked about before, but I think we need to reiterate them, of what VF kind of can be and what it historically has been. Despite getting his ass handed to him in Japan, he's pumped for the love of God. No comeback mechanics or meter shit. Keep it simple, keep it pure. And I understand that. There's a level of purity to VF that I completely sympathize with about it being a martial arts fighting game. But I started seeing a lot of people, and this is where it comes around. You know that thing we talked about? What's worse, Tekken 8 Heat Mode or Soul Calibur 6 Reversal Edge? Early on, we got a chance to play Tekken 8, like way before it was out. And we saw all of these like wild neutral skips and heat mode shit, right? And guess what my first response was? Oh, they're trying to Virtua Fighter Tekken. 100%. A lot of people are like, what are you talking about? There's no heat mode in VF. There's no like giant neutral skips and shit like that. And I argue you can't just change the entirety of the way Tekken works. Like Tekken isn't exactly a strike throw game in the way that Virtua Fighter is, right? Where it's like attack, block, throw. Like that entire loop of what Virtua Fighter is very engaging and makes almost every interaction an RPS, but a rock, paper, scissor that takes place on a mind-blowingly fast level that You're not even thinking about making those decisions constantly. And now Tekken's gotten to a point where it's like a 50-50 game in many situations where you just have to guess between this big ass mix up, hold this big old plus on block thing. It's like, I get it. They are fundamentally different. But the heat system, the whole point of the heat system and the engagement in Tekken 8, the reason that shit exists, the reason it exists in Street Fighter 6, the whole point of these games is that they are trying to incentivize engagement. They are trying to make the game more favorable towards an offender and not as much the defender. And why is that the case? Well, because games like Tekken 7 exist, and Tekken 7 was like the most defensive Tekken has ever kind of been. We're not talking about specifically what Tekken is and why people either like the old thing, like offense, like defense. No. What I'm trying to tell you is that Virtua Fighter is mind-blowingly offensive. When VF went through kind of a big change in the VF4 era going into VF5 and everything, the entire point of Virtua Fighter and kind of why it grabbed a Japanese community as big as it did is that it very much incentivized attacking. If you're not attacking in Virtua Fighter, you're kind of in a bad spot. And I can't tell you from an absolute highest level of Virtua Fighter, but as I was like learning stuff and picking up tips and understanding how this shit works, what I've gathered over time is that like, oh yeah, Virtua Fighter is offensively offensive. And if you're not being the one that is making active decisions constantly and choosing to do this stuff, it's not like it's only offense. It's not like there isn't counter offense. There is, that shit's all over the place. But that was the goal of Tekken. Tekken was a game that became ridiculously defensive over time. And for people to say like, oh, you know, I can't wait till we get to Virtua Fighter where we're gonna get these hyper aggressive mechanics out of 3D gaming and we're gonna get this instead. And I'm like, but bitch, that is VF. You don't get like a shoulder into a punch, heat engager, like type of stuff. You don't really get those same things, but the whole reason that shit was instilled into Tekken was to put it a little bit closer to VF. That isn't something that's new in the space of Tekken and what Harada sort of has looked at between Virtua Fighter being a competitive game compared to Tekken being a competitive game. These games sort of like copying each other in many ways. The history of Tekken is literally based on the roots of VF. In the same way that we're seeing Fatal Fury come out and it's very Street Fighter 6 inspired, that's exactly what Tekken has kind of done over many iterations of its game. Because Virtua Fighter constantly was a game that focused on aggression, it focused on engagement, it focused on characters getting in each other's faces. So what I'm trying to say, and it seems like I've been talking about this shit for a long time, but I think the next VF is 100% going to have that. I think that's like the roots of Virtua Fighter are absolutely instilled in the fact that they're trying to make the characters fight each other. But my expectations moving forward, just for VF in general, I don't think Virtua Fighter is going to keep the same purity that it's had historically. That might not be in the same form of like meters and all of that kind of shit. I don't know if they're gonna have that, but they're definitely gonna change something. And there's a big problem with Virtua Fighter just as a series in general. You have to commit to it a little bit for it to click. You need your fighting game to have immediate visual appeal. People are already saying it in the chat. It looks boring as hell. I will agree with you. I love this shit and I agree with you. Its moment-to-moment interaction is completely player-based, dude. When you see it moving fast and really cool things happen at high level, yeah, you'll see some cool moments here and there, some sick duck into punish or some kind of crazy shit, and it feels amazing to play. But wrestling with the concept that like this is so cool and then you see a video of it and you go, why? I'm not seeing characters flying off buildings, blowing up into walls, all this like nutty stuff. You're not really getting any of that out of VF, and Virtua Fighter moved away from that shit over time. Do I think Virtua Fighter kind of needs to move in that way a little bit? I'm not asking for full-on DOA Tekken stuff, but I do think the game needs a visual hook that has not existed before, and I 100% think that the new game will have that. There's going to be a gimmick. There's going to, like, for example, crushing blows suck mechanically, right? But they're incredibly cool looking, where a counter hit leads to crack, and then you see a slow-mo inside of their face busting open. It needs a spectacle. We really need that. They attempted to do this in Dead or Alive 6, when they neutered a lot of the gameplay, but they turned it into a gameplay mechanic that wasn't particularly great. It was that fist collision shit, right? Where you punch a character and then sometimes when you use a certain mechanic, You get in their face and they go, bleh. Like that was there. It wasn't very good. And another game that tried to do something kind of similar but didn't do a great job, Reversal Edge and Soul Calibur 5. What I'm trying to say is that VF needs to do that shit. They need to really prioritize the visual splendor of a moment-to-moment interaction. In 3D games or in fighting games in general now, the player, whether or not a competitive player or a brand new player, needs to be given information that something has changed. There has been a tide shift in this fight. This player made a choice outside of just being a good read. There is good reads that happen constantly in fighting games. You duck the high, counter hit this thing, you do all that stuff right, but that's been in fighting games forever. So we need to create something that solidifies these moments, right? That really takes something to the point where, oh, people watching the game now understand something big just happened. There's a big difference happening here right now. You know what I mean? I think VF is going to get that. And it may not be in the form of a giant meter or supers or something. And I think they'll be pretty creative with it, because if there's one thing I can give Sega and the Virtua Fighter team and the people that have historically made these games, they come up with some pretty cool ideas. But I think it's going to happen. I don't know if we're going to give every character a bar, but at the same point, expect Virtua Fighter to change. I think it would be disappointing to think that VF doesn't change. Dude, you don't want that, right? You want a new game. You don't want a game that just acts like the previous game. Is there a chance the new game might not be up your alley? Is there a chance that it might not engage you the exact same ways as the previous one? Sure, but it's better that they take a chance of it being something creatively different and new than it effectively being the same old thing over and over again. And now we're just going to do that again and hope it works this time. It's like, I don't agree with that, man. I'd prefer a new fighting game to actually be a different game. You know what I mean? I'm hell of excited. I think Virtua Fighter coming back is some of the best news I've heard all day. If you think so too, I appreciate a thumbs up on this video if you're watching it. And yeah, stay tuned, because I think we're bound to get more info on this sooner.